Hello, everyone. This is Kurt Gardella again, and I'm here with Hamish John Appleby, speaking about another pilgrimage. This one, the Camino via de la Plata. Hamish, let's begin with just a quick introduction to arriving at the starting point of this pilgrimage.
Thanks, Kurt. It's good to catch up with you again. The last time we caught up was in Iceland. That was great. Yes, the Camino via de la Plata was another big Camino that I'd always wanted to do. And having left Germany in not very warm weather and arriving in Seville, where I started, getting off the plane, I remember they opened the doors where we had to walk down onto the tarmac, and the heat that was just sort of the blinding heat and humidity was a real change. But
what was the temperature when you arrived there?
Yeah, it was. I think it was around 35 degrees that day, and hot and dry. It was fantastic.
And once you arrived there, does the trail begin right there? Did you spend a couple of nights there to get used to the area?
I spent a full day in Seville walking around, taking photos, enjoying the city. I have to say, I was in Seville probably 20 years ago, and it was interesting being back there 20 years later and not having remembered anything. It seemed to be like a very different city, but of course memories change over time. I really enjoyed Seville as a city. I went to the Friends of the Camino office and got my credential/passport there for the Camino, and spent a full day in Seville before setting off early the next morning at about 6 a.m.
So the next morning, then, right on the trail.
Next morning, right on the trail with a headlamp, all ready to go through the city, which I actually didn't need in the end. But so I started off in Seville, and that was day one.
Tell us about that first leg, or the first maybe early on the trail. Just give us a feel of this trail, maybe compared to your last pilgrimage, the Camino Norte, I think it was.
Yeah, with all Caminos, they're very different walks, and this one was another very different walk. I noticed even on day one how sparsely. How would I explain it? How it's not that it's desolate, but the distance between sort of shops and even other people you see is so great that it gives you much more of a you're here walking on your own sort of a feel. Whereas Camino Norte was definitely more populated, and as I mentioned in the last conversation we had, the Camino Frances is something entirely different. It's more like a Camino city almost. So this one was a very, very sort of it wasn't the Wild West, but in a way it felt a little bit like the Wild West of Caminos.
What kind of distances are we talking about here between places where you would stop to spend the night?
It changes. I mean, it depends. The thing about this Camino is that there are stages where there are sort of 15 kilometers and 13 kilometers or 35 kilometers. So often people sort of have to decide whether they do two smaller lots or one bigger lot. And some of the distances are 20 kilometers, 25, 30, with nothing in between. So, you'll often see signs at the very last shop as you're leaving a town saying, this is the last possible point where you could buy any food or get water, which is good. But interestingly enough, between most of those very long, big distances, there somehow seem to always be an unknown little water fountain or something. So, I think it's good to prepare for the worst, but somehow that, as with all Caminos, that something is there at the right time when you really need it in most cases.
Did you, seeing that some of the distances were greater or just generally a more desolate feeling on the trail, did you make any adjustments to your planning in terms of the amount of weight you carried, or, I would imagine maybe you carried more water than you normally would on the trail?
I found on this Camino, and I don't know if it was because of the distances being longer, but I found that my backpack irritated me more than it had on the other two previous Caminos. So what I did was I tried to get rid of even more stuff that I conceivably, that I could get my head around sort of not needing. In the end, I got it down to, I think I got it down to about 9 kilos. The big thing about that Camino is you do have to carry a little bit more water and food. Having said that, though, I think if you Yeah, like as I talked quite a bit about, I referred to Johannes, a friend of mine who'd done other Caminos in the past, quite an experienced Camino walker, who actually happens to be in down the other end of the studio today. We might be able to bring him in and get him to have a talk. But
That would be great. We'll bring him in later.
yeah. As Johannes had wisely told me 2 Caminos earlier, is that if you try to drink as much water early in the morning before you set off, and yeah, if you eat something before you set off and drink as much water as possible, it actually saves you weight because you can sort of sustain your energy, through the morning. So I use that as well as a so-called rule.
So you're essentially carrying that water in your body, in your stomach, instead of carrying it on your back.
Yeah, to a point, sure.
Okay. I know in our last conversation, because this whole idea of pilgrimages and walking longer distance like this is sort of new to me. I'm interested again. How was the lodging situation compared to, for example, the Camino Norte? Talk about the possibilities there. I think last time you said you sort of splurged on hotels. Was it similar in this case?
I found the south of Spain generally somehow a little bit cheaper. So accommodation was a little bit cheaper. Things weren't as packed out, but they certainly weren't, as I was led to believe, always. There weren't always spaces available, as I'd been led to believe. This is a Camino that's just soared in popularity in the last year and a half. It's now become sort of the second option to Camino Frances, as the Norte once was. But now that the Norte has become extremely popular as well, I think more and more people are looking to do this Camino as another alternative. But the upside of that is that it will create better infrastructure in the coming years. But the downside at the moment is that there were definitely places that were almost full. So, but to answer your question, I made a more concerted effort on this Camino to stay in cheaper places. One, because I wanted to save money, and two, because I wanted to get even more of a feeling of the, just kind of sort of like sucking it up and roughing it with the albergues. And so I tended not to choose the one room places as much on this Camino. Mind you, I should say at this point I didn't finish it due to an injury, but I guess we'll talk about that a bit later.
We'll talk about that a bit later. That's right. Before we get to that, Hamish, one of the interesting topics for me also during our last conversation is always people that you meet along the way. I know that's a big part of the walk for you. Maybe just pull out one or two people that sort of stood out as, lasting relationships, lasting memories. Go ahead and talk about that.
Yes, well, again, as I said, I've had to pause this Camino due to an injury. So I only actually walked about 8 or 9 days of this Camino, but a couple of people who come to mind that were memorable on this particular Camino Via de la Plata were Dennis from Australia, who was he was sort of almost out of a. He's when people think of Australians, I mean, he's the kind of person people think of. He's the quintessential Australian. He's got the "G'day, mate."
Isn't that you actually?
I don't think so, but prove me wrong. Dennis was a fabulous person to have met up with, and instrumental in a way in my journey by actually forcing me to stop walking, which was very, very important, because what often happens on Caminos is people get so driven to finish them that they ignore injuries. And Dennis basically had to grab me one day and say, "Mate, you got to let it go. You've got to stop. You're going to this is not healthy." And and for that I'm very thankful for. And in fact, ironically enough, a week later, Dennis himself got injured, and so as I ended up in Portugal after this for a while, he actually came and met me, and we hung out for a day or two, which was fantastic. And I'm sure I'll catch up with him in the future. Another person I could probably mention briefly would be Kat, who a woman from England that I met and hung out with. We just, I don't know, it's the British humour. I think we just laughed nonstop all the time. So that was great to hang out with her for a couple of days. Of course, she went on as I got injured, but Kat was also another great person to have met on the Camino.
So 8 or 9 days you walked. So how many kilometers did you actually cover, Hamish, of the complete trail?
Yeah, of the 1,000 kilometers that it is, I got to about 217 and had to finally. I stopped in. I originally stopped in Zafra and ended up in work. Well, ended up in a hostel with Antonio, the manager, who looked after me, and then very, very, very kindly gave me a whole room to myself, where I made a sort of like a kind of like a cave out of blankets and just rested for on and off for about 10 days. And during that 10 days, I decided that it was my role to become a hospitalero and help out at the albergue. So I was doing admissions and a bit of cleaning and so on and so forth. But that was a great experience in Zafra. And then I tried walking again and ended up in Merida, the city of ancient ruins, which was great. But by then, that's when Dennis had said, I got to stop. And he was right. So I did stop in Merida and use that as a 3-day, just 3-day rest to look at some ruins and hang out in Merida.
Well, let's talk about the injury now. I think it's time, Hamish. What happened actually? Was it something with your back?
Yeah, this is the question that everyone asks me. What happened? What happened is that I was stupid. Basically, I walked too hard, too much, too fast, and I was just so excited to be back on the Camino trail. As I mentioned earlier on in this in this talk, that the Camino is divided up into sections, and there are points where you have to sort of decide, do I walk 15 kilometers, which feels too short, or do I add on another 17 kilometers, which makes it, what's 15 and 17, 20, 30, whatever it is. I don't know. My head's a bit...
32.
30, thank you.
32.
Thanks, 32. Yeah, so 32 kilometers may still sound kind of reasonable, but in 35-degree heat, walking on predominantly sort of sandy tracks and often sort of like rocky sandy tracks, it's... at the beginning to start off doing sort of distances like that. And I think on the first day I ended up doing 40 when I should have done 2 days of 20. Yeah. And so after 3 or 4 days of basically stupidity on my behalf, I just pushed it too hard, and it's a trap that a lot of people fall into, unfortunately. And I disappointingly surprised myself that I fell into the same trap, but I can only blame myself in the end.
And then what was it that you ended up having?
Yeah, I actually got quite bad tendinitis in my lower left shin, which sort of it's an arterial tendon that goes sort of from your shin over your foot. And when I was in Zafra, I ended up in 2 different hospitals having all sorts of scans and x-rays and opinions and stuff. But it was very clear after testing that it was tendinitis, and all I could do was a series of physiotherapy sessions in that town, which I did, which somehow helped. And the physiotherapist at the time had sort of said that he believed that I could possibly continue, but having tried it again after a day and a half, my foot was I literally hobbled into Merida, literally hobbled. So that was the end.
I think really this is an interesting aspect of doing a pilgrimage, because is it a problem to just break it off midway and then go back and do it again? I mean, is this the first time this has happened to you, that you've become injured? I know you've done a lot of pilgrimages. Tell us about that. I mean, how does that work? Can you just go back officially to the point where you finished and continue? I think it's an interesting topic actually for our listeners.
Yeah, it is, and that's one of the great things about all Caminos is that once you've got this passport and you've got the stamps in the passport, the stamps indicate where you've stopped and then where you can pick up again. So the important thing is not to have it in your mind that you have to start at a point A and finish at a point B. The point of a Camino is you just have to walk, and wherever it takes you and wherever it stops you is going to be your journey, and you'll learn whatever from that. So obviously I've learned a great deal so far on this Camino. I will be going back to the point where I left off, which is Merida, and continuing hopefully this October. And I'll be doing the other 800 kilometers if I can, but who knows? I mean, it's anyone's guess with this dodgy foot. It's healed, but it's turned into what's called snapping ankle. So my foot's it's created permanent damage to some degree, which I think can be managed with again, good shoes, inner soles, taking lots of rests, easing up on the kilometers, and probably strapping it in part. This is something that you have to sort of deal with. But in terms of stopping and starting, there are no rules. The point is to walk, and I've got the passport, which they'll assess at the end at the Camino office, and you'll still get your certificate. It'll just tell you how many days you've done it in. So I could have done it in 43 days. Now it'll be sort of like started at one point, finished 3 months later or whatever. That's fine. So.
Cool. I just see that Johannes has entered the room. And do you?
Johannes.
Hi. Hey, how you doing, Johannes?
Hello. Thank you for the invitation.
Yeah. Is this Johannes? Is this a trail, a pilgrimage that you've also done already? I know you do these pilgrimages as well around the world.
I haven't done the Via della Plata by itself, but I knew about it for a long time, and I've done the Camino Frances and the Camino Primitivo, and also walked in many other countries like Israel or Japan.
And listening to, in the background here, you could hear probably some of what Hamish was talking about. It sounds like he has the feeling that he just overdid it on this early part of the walk. Would you agree with that?
Absolutely. Especially in the beginning, your body needs to get used to it. We don't walk that much during our daily life, and the body can build up, but we have to be patient and give it a bit of time, and then we can make more distance in the later part of the pilgrimage. That's the way you should do it, as an advice.
The other thing is, because of this problem of fairly long stretches, right, where you said up to 30 kilometers before reaching another area where you could lodge, does that mean maybe that, or is it even allowed that you would, for example, pitch a tent or just sleep out on the trail? Is that something that people do with these longer stretches?
Officially, no one's allowed to camp. Unofficially, you do see tents dotted around everywhere. And I think that provided you're respectful, and what I mean by respectful is you don't leave any rubbish and you dig holes where you need to for obvious things, that police will probably, in many occasions, turn a blind eye. I know that some people in the past have asked locals to stay on their farms, and that's often been met with very positively. What would you say, Johannes?
Yeah, you rarely see some people. In other countries, it might be more common, but usually on the Caminos, people stay in these albergues or hotels or guest houses.
Right. So, but I'm just wondering if maybe it's almost a necessity. Like, for example, next time when you continue the trail, Hamish, and you feel like your shin has had enough, can you just stop and say, I'm going to spend the night here? Would that be a helpful strategy maybe next time?
I think if you were carrying a tent, or at least one of those over tarps, whatever things, it would be. And if it wasn't raining on a hot night, it would still be probably possible. It's not my preference, but of course, if you have to stop, you have to stop. And I could imagine. I did meet a gentleman on that trail who. He didn't refuse to sleep in paid accommodation, but he wanted to make a point of trying to always camp outside wherever he could for the entire journey. So I know that he told me he'd had a couple of wonderful experiences just leaving his sleeping mat on the ground and sleeping under the stars. And it was so warm already in May, believe it or not, that he was able to do that. So look, it's conceivable, sure.
You could always catch a train as well to the next town, forth and back, because you're walking in quite an infrastructure country and in a Western country. So you're never far away from any public transport either. So
you could stop, take a train to town, spend the night, then take the train back out the next morning and continue the walk.
Or even go further and skip a part if you don't want to walk. I mean, it's really up to you. You make your rules. There's nothing fixed. That is very important. You don't have to follow anything. You don't have to do anything. So it's really only what you want.
Hamish, we have about another minute here. I'd like to finish up with the topic of October. You said you might return in October to continue this walk. I'm assuming the conditions will be a little bit different in October compared to May.
Yeah, the conditions should be that it'll be a little bit cooler. Although I've been looking at the weather reports from the previous years, it won't be that much cooler, but it'll be starting to get cooler. And as I work my way up to Galicia, by the time I get to Galicia, it'll be definitely a drop of a few degrees in temperature. But my aim is to continue the journey in October. I just wanted to make a point that, referring to what Johannes was saying, there are no rules. Do what you feel. There are some people who would say that they have to do the whole thing. I guess I'm one of them. So, for example, when I stopped, I did have to get a bus to the next town, but I did get the bus back to where I stopped and then walked that section that I'd missed. But people don't have to do that. In fact, on many Caminos, people avoid industrial areas, as I'd mentioned in the first one, because they've got no interest in walking them. So that's, there are no rules, as Johannes sort of said.
I think we'll finish on that note. Thank you very much. And Hamish, looking forward to hearing about the end of this walk in the part 2 episode of this talk. And of course, also future walks and future discussions about your walks. It's an interesting topic for me, and I think also for our listeners.
Thanks, Kurt. Thanks for having me back in the German studio. That's very kind of you. And I look forward to speaking to you about part 2, hopefully when I've finished this Camino via de la Plata.
And thanks to you also, Johannes, for stopping in. And Johannes, any plans for walks in the next coming months, coming years?
Yes, I have actually. I would like to walk the Camino Portuguese, which Hamish has done. And then I would like to finish my Israel National Trail, where I still have 600 kilometers open. I only walked the desert part. So this is still in this year, my plan. Yeah.
All happening this year before the end of 2019.
Yes, that's the plan.
Good luck with that too, Johannes. Thanks again. Talk to you guys soon.
Thank you. And
Thanks, Kurt.
keep on walking.
Yeah, keep on walking.